A week after Ethan's life split cleanly into two, he found himself staring at the ceiling in a room that no longer felt like home. Before that week, every breath he took was a fight against time, as he poured everything he had into saving his mother from stage 4 cancer. After that week, everything he believed in shattered the moment he uncovered the betrayal hiding right inside the person he trusted most. The hope he held on to, the love he thought was unbreakable, and the future he imagined, all of it collapsed in a single, devastating moment. What began as a desperate struggle to keep his mother alive suddenly turned into a battle for truth, justice, and the last pieces of his own sanity. After Ethan's father passed away, the house took on a silence that seemed heavier than grief itself. He was suddenly the only person left to shoulder everything: the bills, the decisions, and most painfully, the desperate fight to keep his mother alive. When the diagnosis came, stage 4 cancer, Ethan didn't even allow himself time to break. He threw himself into action, researching every treatment, every trial, every hospital with even a sliver of hope. That was how the HopeLine Fund was born, a donation pool he built from scratch, combining community support, family friends, and everything he had saved over the years. Every dollar in that fund represented a chance his mother might live long enough to see tomorrow. Ashley had been by his side for 4 years, long enough for Ethan to trust her the way someone trusts the ground beneath their feet. She knew his mother, ate dinner with them, spent holidays in their living room, and promised she would help him carry the weight he never asked for. When hospital payments became too frequent and Ethan had to juggle 2 jobs just to keep up, giving Ashley access to the HopeLine card felt natural, almost necessary. She offered it herself, saying it would relieve him of at least one burden. He remembered the way she reassured him, pressing the card into her wallet as if it was something sacred she would guard with her life. Ethan believed her. He believed her because he needed to, because there were nights he returned home too exhausted to stand, collapsing next to his mother's bed and praying silently that he wasn't failing her. Ashley became his anchor during that time. She brought meals to the hospital, stayed overnight on uncomfortable chairs, and held Ethan whenever the doctors delivered news that felt like a punch to the chest. She told him they would get through it together. She told him his mother would hold on long enough for a miracle. And Ethan, tired, grieving, terrified, let himself lean on her more than he ever had on anyone. Every payment Ashley handled, every signed receipt, every hospital update she passed along felt like a small piece of stability in the chaos. There were weeks when Ethan barely slept, and Ashley seemed like the only person keeping him upright. She reminded him to eat. She reminded him to breathe. She reminded him that love meant trusting someone else with the things you were most afraid to lose. So when she offered to manage the medical payments entirely, Ethan said yes without a second thought. It wasn't just a card he placed in her hands. It was the lifeline he had built for his mother's survival. And at that time, he believed he was placing it in the safest hands he knew. The day the doctors delivered the news, Ethan almost didn't understand what he was hearing. For months, every appointment had been a careful balance between dread and forced optimism, but this time the air in the room felt different. The oncologist's expression softened, and Ethan's heartbeat stumbled when he realized the man wasn't preparing to deliver another blow. Instead, he said the scans showed a complete and unexpected remission, the kind of turnaround that happened so rarely it bordered on miraculous. Ethan felt his vision blur, not from fear, but from a wave of relief so powerful it made his knees weak. He grabbed his mother's hand, and for the first time in nearly a year, she smiled without pain tightening the corners of her eyes. They cried, laughed, and cried again, clinging to each other like survivors pulled from a storm. On the drive home, Ethan couldn't stop replaying the doctor's words, unable to believe that the nightmare might finally be ending. He rehearsed what he would tell Ashley, how he would lift her off the ground and spin her, how they would finally get to breathe again. He pictured the way she would react, the relief she would feel after months of watching him fall apart. Every moment felt like a new beginning. By the time he reached their apartment, he was overflowing with gratitude and excitement, ready to share the greatest news of his life. He opened the door without knocking, eager to surprise her, expecting to see her curled up on the couch or scrolling through her laptop. Instead, Ashley froze mid-sentence, as if he had just caught her doing something she shouldn't. Her phone slipped slightly in her hand, and she fumbled to lock the screen before he could see anything. There was none of the excitement he expected. No joy. No tears. Just a sudden, sharp panic in her eyes. "Why are you home so early?" she asked, her voice thin, almost trembling. Ethan laughed softly, thinking she was just startled, and rushed to tell her the news. But as the words poured out, his mother's remission, the doctor's surprise, the miracle they had barely dared to hope for, Ashley didn't react the way he imagined. She didn't run to hug him. She didn't smile. She didn't say a word. Instead, her face drained of color, and her breathing quickened like she had been shoved underwater. Ethan's excitement slowly dimmed as he took in her expression, an expression he had never seen on her face before, fear mixed with something he couldn't quite name. She backed away from him slightly, her hands shaking, her eyes flicking between him and her locked phone. It was the first moment Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him, the first crack in the trust he thought was unbreakable. He couldn't explain it then, but deep in his chest, something cold settled in. The miracle that should have brought relief had instead uncovered the first sign that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Ethan didn't raise his voice at first. He simply stood there, staring at Ashley as confusion tightened around his ribs like a vice. He kept replaying her reaction in his mind, trying to understand why the best news of their lives had hit her like a catastrophe. When she wouldn't look at him, wouldn't speak, wouldn't even breathe steadily, the unease growing inside him shifted into something sharper. He asked her what was wrong, gently at first, then more firmly when she continued to avoid his eyes. Her hands were trembling so badly, she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady herself. For a long moment, the room filled with a silence so thick Ethan felt like he was suffocating in it. Then Ashley whispered something he didn't catch. When he asked her to repeat it, she covered her face with both hands and let out a broken sob. The sound chilled him more than any diagnosis ever had. Finally, she forced herself to speak, her voice cracking as she confessed that she had done something terrible, something she couldn't take back. Ethan felt his stomach drop, but nothing, not even the worst possibilities, prepared him for what she said next. Ashley admitted she had used the HopeLine fund. Not borrowed. Not accidentally spent. She had drained it. Every last dollar. $150,000 gone. Ethan felt the world tilt, the air thinning around him as if someone had opened a trapdoor beneath his feet. He stared at her, waiting for her to say she was joking, that she misunderstood, that there was some kind of mistake. But Ashley kept talking, rambling through her tears, confessing that she had used the money to launch an online boutique, something she claimed would secure their financial future. She said she thought it was an investment. She said she thought it would pay off. She said she believed Ethan's mom wouldn't be here much longer anyway, because the doctors had predicted 6 months to a year. Ethan couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The person he trusted with his mother's lifeline, the person he thought loved him, had made a decision so cold it left him trembling. He asked her how she could justify gambling with his mother's survival. Ashley insisted she had planned to replace the money once the boutique became profitable, that she never imagined his mother would survive long enough for anyone to notice. Her words sliced through him like broken glass. She had counted on his mother dying. She had assumed it. And she had acted on that assumption with no hesitation. Ethan felt something inside him fracture, something he knew would never repair. His hands shook as he asked her again, slowly, painfully, If she truly believed she had the right to decide his mother's fate because she thought death was inevitable. Ashley cried harder, repeating that she was scared, overwhelmed, hopeful for their future. But nothing she said sounded like remorse. It sounded like excuses. It sounded like someone trying to justify a betrayal, so deliberate it left Ethan hollow. In that moment, he realized the miracle that saved his mother had simultaneously exposed the truth that would destroy everything else in his life. Ethan didn't remember reaching for his phone. One moment he was staring at Ashley, numb and shaking, and the next he was dialing emergency services with a steadiness that didn't match the storm ripping through his chest. Ashley begged him to stop, grabbing at his arm, insisting they could fix this together, but her words barely registered anymore. Something inside Ethan had snapped cleanly in half, leaving behind a clarity colder than anything he had ever felt. When the dispatcher answered, his voice came out flat, almost detached, as he reported financial theft and abuse involving the HopeLine fund. Ashley froze, realizing he wasn't bluffing. As he gave their address, she slid down the wall, sobbing uncontrollably, repeating the same broken apologies she had given moments earlier. But none of it mattered now. By the time the officers arrived, Ethan had already pulled together what documents he had: bank statements, hospital bills, screenshots of payment confirmations he remembered her handling. He couldn't stop shaking as he handed them over. The officers listened carefully, asked questions, and noted that a full investigation would follow. Ashley tried to intervene, insisting it was a relationship dispute, insisting she had permission, insisting Ethan misunderstood. But the officers didn't dismiss the situation, especially after hearing the amount taken and the fact that the fund was for his mother's medical care. They told Ethan the case would be transferred to detectives within the Financial Crimes Division, and he would be contacted soon. Ethan spent the next days in a haze, moving between the hospital and the police station, giving statements, gathering every piece of evidence he could find. He printed months of bank records, highlighting withdrawals that lined up with specific dates his mother's condition had worsened. Detectives noticed the pattern immediately. Each hospital's setback matched a spike in spending: luxury inventory orders, marketing fees, web development charges, all tied to Ashley's boutique. It was as if she had treated each moment of their despair as an opportunity to take more. Detectives described the timeline as remarkably clean, the kind of case structure that prosecutors rarely received so neatly packaged. Ethan hadn't meant to build a perfect case. He had simply collected every scrap of truth he could find, trying to make sense of a betrayal that made no sense at all. When detectives reached out to him again, they asked for text messages, emails, or anything that might illuminate Ashley's intentions. Ethan hesitated before scrolling through his phone, but the messages were unavoidable. Days when he told her he couldn't afford additional treatments, moments he was breaking down, begging the universe for mercy, while she quietly withdrew more money without hesitation. Detectives added everything to the growing file. With each document Ethan signed, the weight on his shoulders grew heavier, but so did his resolve. He hadn't chosen this fight, but he wasn't going to run from it. When he finally left the station, after a long meeting with the lead detective, he realized something painful and undeniable. The truth was no longer just heartbreaking. It was criminal. Ashley was arrested early on a Tuesday morning, and Ethan learned about it through a brief, emotionless voicemail from the lead detective. By the time he arrived at the station, she was already in holding, her wrists cuffed, her eyes swollen from crying, but the sight stirred nothing in him anymore. Detectives informed him that the district attorney had decided to file 2 felony charges: grand theft and elder financial abuse. The severity of the charges made Ashley's attorney move quickly, and within days he began crafting a narrative that left Ethan in stunned disbelief. The lawyer argued that this wasn't a criminal case, but a relationship conflict, claiming the couple shared finances informally and that Ashley had acted under the assumption that the money was as much hers as his. He tried to frame the HopeLine fund as a shared household asset, twisting every small detail to make it appear like a messy breakup rather than the deliberate theft of a medical lifeline. Ethan sat through the preliminary hearing, feeling like he had entered a parallel world where logic no longer applied. The defense painted Ashley as a young woman overwhelmed by love, stress, and financial uncertainty, claiming she believed she was helping build a secure future for the two of them. But every time her lawyer tried to bend the truth, the prosecution countered with a timeline so precise it cut their arguments apart. They presented withdrawal records that aligned with specific nights Ethan had stayed at the hospital, nights when Ashley knew he was too exhausted to monitor anything. They presented messages where Ethan apologized for being unable to afford another specialized treatment, while Ashley simultaneously placed bulk orders for boutique inventory. They showed social media posts celebrating the launch of her business, posted on the exact same days Ethan had texted her asking if she could cover another medical bill. Each piece of evidence made the courtroom feel colder. The prosecutor emphasized that this wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was sustained, calculated exploitation. Ashley's attorney pushed back relentlessly, insisting she never meant harm, that she believed Ethan's mother had limited time left, that she hoped to replace the money once her business succeeded. But those arguments only made matters worse. The admission that she acted because she assumed his mother would die struck the courtroom like a slap. Even the judge's expression shifted, tightening at the edges. The prosecutor argued that Ashley had treated a dying woman's suffering as a financial opportunity and had built her entire business on the expectation of someone else's loss. Ethan listened, his hands clasped so tightly they trembled. He never wanted vengeance, but he couldn't deny the truth being laid out in front of everyone. The evidence spoke for itself. He watched as the judge denied Ashley's request for reduced charges, stating the magnitude of the betrayal and the vulnerability of the victim made leniency inappropriate. For the first time since the nightmare began, Ethan realized the case was no longer about emotions or heartbreak. It had become a matter of law, responsibility, and accountability, something far bigger than the ruins of their relationship. The courtroom felt impossibly small on the morning the trial began, as if the walls themselves understood the weight of what was about to be revealed. Ethan sat beside his mother, whose frail hands trembled slightly, though her eyes stayed steady with a strength he didn't know she still had. Ashley entered with her attorney, her posture stiff, her gaze flickering everywhere except toward Ethan. For a brief second, he wondered if she would attempt to apologize again, but she simply sat down, jaw clenched, already preparing to fight the truth. The prosecution opened by laying out the core of the case: a vulnerable patient, a son desperate to save her, and a partner who used their darkest moments as a window to siphon away everything meant to preserve a life. Ashley's attorney countered with claims of emotional confusion, financial misunderstanding, and the supposed complexity of long-term relationships. He tried to portray her as a young woman crushed under pressure, someone who had acted impulsively rather than maliciously. But the moment Ashley took the stand, her own words began unraveling the defense. She contradicted herself multiple times, changing the timeline of when she began using the funds, altering the reasons she believed she had permission, and fumbling when questioned about her assumption that Ethan's mother would not survive. The prosecutor pushed gently yet precisely, guiding her through her statements until her inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. Each answer she gave dug the hole deeper, exposing a mindset that the jury visibly recoiled from. At one point, when asked why she continued taking money even after doctors recommended a new treatment, she hesitated too long. The silence said more than her eventual response. Ethan's mother testified next, her voice fragile but unwavering. She told the court about the nights Ethan slept in a chair next to her bed, the sacrifices he made, the hope he held on to even when the odds were unbearably slim. She described the guilt she felt when she learned the fund meant to save her life had been drained for something as trivial as a boutique. Her testimony drew tears from several jurors. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as if trying to absorb every word. When the prosecutor rested the case, there was a palpable shift in the room. Ashley's attorney attempted to recover, calling a few character witnesses who spoke of her passion for business and her dreams for the future, but none of it touched the gravity of what had already been laid bare. By the time closing arguments were delivered, it felt clear to everyone that the verdict was inevitable. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood, hands steady, and announced Ashley was guilty on all charges. A soft gasp rippled through the room, but Ashley simply stared down at the table, her face blank, as if the reality hadn't fully reached her yet. The judge's sentence followed shortly after, 10 years in state prison. He called her actions a profound violation of trust and said she had effectively stolen hope from a dying woman. Ethan felt no triumph, only a deep, quiet exhaustion. Justice had been served, but the cost of the truth had carved something inside him he knew would never fully heal. A year passed, and life settled into a quieter rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar after so much chaos. Ethan and his mother rebuilt the HopeLine fund piece by piece, starting small, holding community events, and slowly regaining the trust that had once been shattered. His mother's remission held steady, surprising her doctors and giving Ethan a sense of gratitude that never dimmed. There were still difficult days, moments when memories surfaced like old wounds, but the weight of them grew lighter as time moved forward. People often asked Ethan whether he felt responsible for Ashley's prison sentence, and every time he answered the same way. He didn't put her there. Her choices did. He had simply refused to let betrayal masquerade as love or sacrifice. As he looked ahead, Ethan realized that justice wasn't the final chapter. It was only the doorway. Healing came afterward, slowly, quietly, and without fanfare. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt like the future was something he didn't have to fear.